From my last talk to you, I should like to tell you of the day on which I was shot down. Not because it was in any way remarkable, but because it has naturally enough remained clear in my memory and is at the same time a fairly typical day in the life of a squadron. September the 3rd dawned dark and overcast, with a slight breeze ruffling the water of the estuary. Hornchurch wore its usual morning pallor of yellow fog, making visibility practically impossible. From time to time, a balloon would poke its head grotesquely through the mist as though looking for possible victims, before falling back again like some tired monster. We came out onto the tarmac at about 8 o'clock to find that during the night our machines had been moved from the dispersal point over to the hangars, while all the machine tools, oil and general equipment had been left on the far side of the aerodrome. I was seriously worried, as after a recent bombing ordeal, my plane had been fitted out with a brand new hood. This hood, unfortunately, wouldn't open, and with a depleted ground staff and no tools, I began to fear it never would. But miraculously, Uncle George, our squadron leader, produced a lorry and 3 men, who quickly returned with a large file and some lubricating oil. Whereupon the corporal fitter and I set upon the hood with a fury of haste, taking it turn by turn to file and oil and file, until at last the hood began to move, but agonizingly slowly. By 10 o'clock, when the mist had cleared and the sun was blazing out of a clear sky, it was still sticking firmly halfway along the groove. At 10:15, what I'd feared for the last hour happened. Down the tannoy came the emotionless voice of the controller. 603 Squadron, take off from patrol base. You will receive further orders in the air. 603 Squadron, take off as quickly as you can, please. As I pressed the starter and the engine roared into life, the corporal stepped back and crossed his fingers significantly. I felt the usual sick feeling in the pit of the stomach, as though I were about to row a race, and then I was too busy getting into position to feel anything. Uncle George in the leading section took off in a cloud of dust. Brian Carberry looked across and put up his thumbs. I nodded and opened up to take off for the last time from Hornchurch. I was flying number 3 in Brown's section, with Stapleton on the right. The 3rd section consisted of only 2 machines, so that our squadron strength was 8. We headed southeast, climbing all out on a steady course. At about 12,000 feet, we came up through the clouds, and looking down, I saw them spread out below me like layers of whipped cream. The sun was brilliant and made it difficult to see even the next plane when turning. I was peering anxiously ahead, as the controller had given us warning of at least 50 enemy fighters approaching very high. When we did first sight them, nobody shouted, as I think everyone saw them at the same moment. They must have been 500 to 1,000 feet above us, and coming straight on like a huge swarm of locusts. I remember cursing and automatically going into line astern. The next moment we were in among them, and it was each man for himself. As soon as they saw us, they spread out and dived, and the next 10 minutes was a blur of twisting machines and tracer bullets. One Messerschmitt went down in a sheet of flames on my right, and a Spitfire hurtled past in a half roll. I was weaving and turning in a desperate attempt to gain height, with the machine practically hanging on the air screw. Then, just below me, and to my left, I saw what I'd been praying for, a Messerschmitt climbing and away from the sun. I closed in to 200 yards, and from slightly to one side, gave him a 2-second burst. Fabric ripped off the wing and black smoke poured from the engine, but he didn't go down. Like a fool, I didn't break away, but put in another 3-second burst. Red flame shot upwards and he spiraled out of sight. At that moment, I felt a terrific explosion which knocked the control stick from my hand, and the whole machine quivered like a stricken animal. In a second, the cockpit was a mass of flame. I reached up to open the hood. It wouldn't move. I tore off my straps and managed to force it back. But this took time, and when I dropped back into the seat and reached for the stick in an effort to turn the plane onto its back, the heat was so intense that I could feel myself going. I remember thinking, so this is it. and putting both my hands up to my eyes. Then I passed out. I regained consciousness free of the machine and falling rapidly. I pulled the ripcord of my parachute and checked my descent with a jerk. Looking down, I saw that my left trouser leg was burnt off, that I was going to fall into the sea, and that the English coast was deplorably far away. About 20 feet above the water, I attempted to undo my parachute, failed, and flopped into the sea with it billowing around me. The water was not unwarm, and I was pleasantly surprised to find that my life jacket kept me afloat. I looked at my watch. It was not there. Then for the first time I noticed how burnt my hands were. Down to the wrist the skin was dead white and hung in shreds. I felt faintly sick from the smell of burnt flesh. By closing one eye I could see my lips jutting out like Michelin tires, while the side of my parachute harness was particularly painful, so that I guessed my right hip was burnt. I made a further attempt to undo the harness, but owing to the pain in my hands soon desisted. Instead, I lay back and reviewed my position. I was a long way from land. My hands were burnt, and so, judging from the pain of the sun, was my face. It was unlikely that anyone on shore had seen me come down, and even more unlikely that a ship would come by. I could float for possibly 4 hours in my life jacket. I began to feel that I was perhaps premature in considering myself lucky to have escaped from the machine. After about half an hour, my teeth started chattering, and to quieten them, I kept up a regular, tuneless chant, varying it from time to time with calls for help. There can be few more futile pastimes than yelling for help alone in the North Sea with a solitary seagull for company. Yet it gave me a certain melancholy satisfaction, for I had once written a short story in which the hero, falling from a liner, had done just this. It was rejected. The water now seemed much colder, and I noticed with surprise that the sun had gone in, though my face was still burning. I looked down at my hands, and not seeing them, realized that I'd gone blind. So I was going to die. It came to me like that. I was going to die, and oddly enough, I was not afraid. This realization came as a surprise to me. The manner of my approaching demise appalled and horrified me, but the actual vision of death left me unmoved. I felt only a profound curiosity and a sense of satisfaction that within a few minutes, or a few hours, I was to discover the answer to the question civilization had never solved. I decided that it should be in a few minutes. I had no qualms about hurrying things along a bit, and reaching up, I managed to unscrew the valve of my life jacket. The air escaped in a rush, and my head went underwater. It is said by people all but dead from the sea that drowning is a pleasant death. I didn't find it so. I swallowed a large quantity of water before my head came up again, but derived little satisfaction from it. I tried again, to find that I couldn't get my face under. I was so enmeshed in my parachute that I couldn't move. For the next 10 minutes, I tore my hands to ribbons on the spring release catch. It was stuck fast. I lay back exhausted, and then I started to laugh. I was probably hysterical, but my grand gesture of suicide, being so oddly thwarted, struck me as grotesque. Goethe once wrote as a young man that no one, unless he had led the full life and realized himself completely, had the right to take his own life. Providence seemed determined that I should not incur the great man's displeasure. It has often been said that a dying man relives his whole life in one rapid kaleidoscope. I merely thought rather gloomily of the squadron returning, of my mother at home, and of the few people who had missed me. Outside my family, I could count those on the fingers of one hand. What did gratify me enormously was to find that I indulged in no frantic abasements or prayers to the Almighty. It is an old jibe by God-fearing Christians that the irreligious always change their tune when about to die. I was pleased to be able to prove them wrong. Faced with an indeterminate period of waiting, I began to feel depressingly lonely and sought for some means to take my mind off my plight. Knowing that I must soon become delirious, I attempted to hasten the process by encouraging my mind to wander vaguely and aimlessly, and I experienced a certain peace. Then I forced myself to think of something concrete and found that I was still only too lucid. I went on doing this with varying success until I was picked up. I remember hearing somebody shout, as if in a dream. It seemed so far away and quite unconnected with me. Then, willing arms were dragging me over the side. My parachute was taken off, and with such ease. A brandy flask was pushed between my lips. A voice said, "Okay, it's Joe." One of ours and still kicking, and I was safe. I was neither relieved nor angry. I was past caring. It was to the Margate lifeboat that I owed my rescue. Watchers on the coast had seen me come down, and for 3 hours they'd been searching for me. Owing to wrong directions, they were just giving up and turning back for land, when, ironically enough, one of them saw my parachute. They were then 15 miles east of Margate, and I had been in the sea 3.5 hours. While in the water, I had been numb and felt very little pain. Now that I began to thaw out, the agony was such that I could have cried out. The good fellows made me as comfortable as possible, put up some sort of awning to keep the sun from my face, and phoned through for a doctor. After what seemed an eternity, we reached the shore. I was put into an ambulance and driven rapidly to hospital. Through all this, I was quite conscious, though unable to see. Arrived at the hospital, they cut off my uniform. I gave the requisite information to a nurse about my next of kin, and then, to my infinite relief, felt a hypodermic syringe pushed into my arm. I can't help feeling that perhaps a good epitaph for me would be that verse of Verlaine. Tout que son patrie et son roi, et très brave ne l'est en guerre. J'ai voulu mourir à la guerre. La mort n'a pas voulu de moi.